Hey folks, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is May 31st, 2020. It's a Sunday, and this is really kind of an incredible time in the United States. And we may be finally starting to see the kind of pushback, uprising, protest, mass demonstration, and just general outpouring of rage that is required for change in this country. In case you haven't noticed, voting does not get it. And while there's a lot of scary, dangerous stuff going on and people are getting hurt and cops are beating the fuck out of people, it's also very exciting because finally this may result in some actual change. So what has been going on? I haven't made any videos. This isn't really about me, but I haven't made any videos in the last week or two. I just really wasn't feeling it. From my point of view, the left coalition that was around Bernie Sanders started to die as soon as he got behind Joe Biden in the middle of a total fucking global crisis. Actually, to use Bernie's own words, a global fucking crisis of the pandemic of coronavirus. He just bailed out, gets behind Joe Biden, one of the most racist right-wing pieces of shit the Democratic Party has put up in many years. Super depressing, very demoralizing. People are not able to work. They're given $1,200 and supposed to last 3 months on it. There's a massive bailout. It's like, there's like a massive drought, just like getting drier and drier and drier, so that where like a single spark is going to set the entire thing ablaze. And that is exactly what happened when the murder of black man, sorry, that's like a weird title to give somebody. A black man named George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight by a white cop, Derek Chauvin, on the streets of Minneapolis. Broad daylight, he's screaming, "I can't breathe." We have seen that in recent years. Same exact thing, Eric Garner. And when is somebody going to care? Well, like I said, country was just dry timber. People are unemployed. People are, given $600 a month and maybe something from their state plus, $1,200, and we're just supposed to last through this indefinite pandemic. Many states have extended their states of emergency, which I support. I mean, coronavirus, it's a horrible disease. Nobody should want it. The reopen protests, which I was planning to do a video about, and then I don't know, maybe I still will, but they're right-wing astroturfed. It's just so goddamn depressing. And, I've been doing personally this kind of left-wing anti-war, whatever activism for about 20 years. And I've been wondering, when are people just going to stand up? Well, here's what it took. It took everyone being unemployed, like on a mass basis, because Americans work more than basically any other comparable country. I think the average working hours is around 50 in the United States, whereas it's like 35 to 40 in European countries. So Americans work more. We have 2 to 3 jobs. We're stressed. Most people live paycheck to paycheck, can't afford a $500 to $1,000 emergency. And that's exactly what the pandemic is. You're told to stay home and not work. Many people missed their mortgage or rent payments in May. We got another one coming up tomorrow, June 1st, Monday. There's no solutions. The ruling class, 1% capitalists, are just looting the country, just paid themselves like billions of dollars in a I don't even know if it's trillions now. They're just scooping the money out of the U.S. Treasury with both hands. And finally, people have the free time and are just pissed off enough, I guess. And there's, been a lot of left-wing agitation online between the guillotine memes and everything else that we've been doing to try to raise consciousness, get people to read theory, understand communism, understand the long history of struggle across the entire world for oppressed workers to stand up and overthrow capitalism, which has worked. And it's still in existence in various countries. It's been rolled back to capitalism in other places. But, this is a system that can work if workers really get organized and apply themselves and fight hard, make sacrifices, obviously, but, do it. And there's been this long running thing in the left in the United States. So actually, that kind of reminds me of the topic of infighting. My personal theory on infighting, which the U.S. left is famous for, I think infighting results from a lack of action and a lack of activity, because leftists in the United States tend to be fucking pissed because there's a lot to be pissed about. There's massive, massive injustice in this country, and we're 100,000%, a billion% right to, have that very justified anger. But when we're not focused on something productive as an outlet for that anger, we tend to turn on each other. And so you see all these schisms and splits and just kind of crazy bullshit going on in the left, and that's on top of like police infiltration and counterintelligence, COINTELPRO, stuff like that, that is deliberately there to sabotage us by cops on behalf of the 1%. But here we are. We're finally in a place where there is honestly an unprecedented amount of protest, uprising activity across the United States. So I want to talk about that. First of all, the title of this video, Capitalism Killed George Floyd, Racist Cop Chauvin Was Its Weapon, Don't Be a Single Issue Rioter. What does that mean? Well, it is great to see this outpouring. Like I said, obviously sparked off of a tragedy, which, that tragedy of George Floyd's murder was the spark. The kindling was dried out by lots of hardship and oppression. None of these are good things. But finally, people are standing up because this is what it takes to get change. Okay, elections aren't going to cut it. Bernie was the compromise. Bernie Sanders is fucking irrelevant at this point. Okay, he took himself out of the race. He took Medicare, and his stepping down took things like Medicare for all, took it off the table. I mean, like within days of his dropping out, we were back to Medicare for all. What's that? It just wasn't coming up on the news anymore, etc. So his stepping down, he needed to be a fucking doorstop. He needed to keep that door from closing and to keep our presence. And he failed to even do that, instead bending over to lick Joe Biden's nuts and, say, oh yeah, just elect this corporate puppet, right-wing tool, racist Joe Biden. Everything will be fucking great. Thanks, Bernie. That was a fucking lie. So here we are, after a couple of, month and a half of pretty depressing shit. Finally, people are standing up. And again, while it's dangerous and, steeped in tragedy, this is what it takes to get change. And I'm glad people are out there doing what it takes to get change. So is this a protest? Is it an uprising? Is it a revolution? So, talking with fellow leftists, I tend to concur. This is not a revolution. What is a revolution, by the way? Revolution doesn't just mean big change. It means specifically when one ruling class is exchanged with another ruling class. What we're looking for right now is, as socialists, the current ruling class is the bourgeoisie, capitalist 1% class. These are people who own industry in a private capacity, run it for profit, just to line their own pockets. That's the current system. That is the current ruling class. What we're looking for is a socialist revolution, a proletarian revolution, in which that ruling class is replaced with a new ruling class, where the working class, the proletariat, dispossessed workers who have nothing to sell but our labor. We don't own industry. We don't own our own jobs, whatever. If we do own our own jobs, it's very minimal. Don't have employees. But yeah, the proletariat, dispossessed workers. We're looking for the proletariat to kick out the capitalist class by changing the entire system. Seize power, change the property rules so that you cannot own industry for profit. It has to be held collectively and operated to meet the needs of the people, not for private profit. Okay? So that's just a little rundown on what we mean by socialism and revolution. So, which is also distinct from, say, regime change, which was a popular term popularized during the George W. Bush years, talking about ousting a ruler. No. Because the United States actually has regime changes every 4 to 8 years at the, presidential level, and, every 6 in the Senate. You can have a regime change. You can have a different group of people from the same ruling class. And yeah, you'll get a slightly different flavor of the same ruling system, but it is not a revolution in any way. So again, just to recap, revolution, change of ruling class; regime change, change of ruling clique or ruling party. but not necessarily a change in the class structure. Okay, that out of the way. What's the difference between an uprising and a revolution? Well, largely organization. Now, I'm going to say, first of all, I think that what's going on right now in the United States, I mentioned it was unprecedented. I think this is it. And my theory, we had kind of an interesting decade in the 2010s for social democracy, progressivism, whatever. The 2000s were a very conservative, reactionary, proto-fascist decade. In the 2010s, there was a lot of like social democrats and progressive reform capitalists who had their day in the sun. And I think that culminated in the Bernie Sanders candidacies. In the 2020s, I think we could really have a far left dominant decade. And that's what I'm looking for. But I also think it's going to take about a decade, at least 5 years, to get from where we are right now to having a working class that is actually capable of pulling off revolution, which is a big deal, because think of how entrenched the 1% is. Okay, they're entrenched. And we can see this in country after country that has had socialist revolutions. Look at Venezuela or Bolivia. I mean, they've had to deal with counter revolutions and capitalist coups over and over and over again. So, I mean, even when you manage to get a revolutionary working class clique into power, hanging on to that revolution is a decades-long process. I mean, the USSR ultimately was drowned in large part by the military spending that the United States was cornering it into. So, as long as there is a single capitalist left in the world, there's a danger of socialism being overthrown. That said, I mean, we've only been working in earnest on this struggle for about 100 years, and there's already been significant lessons learned, what to do, what not to do, and there's also still things that need to be figured out. Okay, so this is an uprising. It's an unprecedented one, and I think that it's setting the 2020s up to be a really interesting time where the politics of the past, that's gone. Bernie Sanders was kind of the last gasp of more reform-oriented, electoral change. So now we're in the streets, and we need to stay in the streets, and people need to get organized, read theory, join groups, get organized, get strategic, because that is how we're going to go from looting a Target or burning a Wells Fargo to seizing control of the system, kicking the capitalists out, and running industry in a sustainable, nonprofit way, establishing socialism. Okay, so that's the goal. But so how do I think we get from here to there? So the two big things that I'm seeing before us right now, this is my 2 cents to the socialist communist movement of the United States. I think that there are two main points. One, we need to deal with the property damage question and just develop a line around that that is a consensus and that is a good explanation and that everybody can get on board with, because there's this whole narrative of property damage delegitimizes protests. We need just a totally solid way of defending that, because it's going to happen. And yeah, we see that cops try to provoke it, yet at the same time, we cheer it when the building is burning. So it's like, okay, the cops want to put it there because they think that it delegitimizes us, but then we're happy as hell to see an auto zone burn to the ground. So which is it? I mean, it seems like we need to acknowledge that people fucking hate corporate America and want to see it burn to the ground. So, cops can go ahead and think that it's going to delegitimize us. Well, it only delegitimizes us if we think it delegitimizes us. But anyway, we need to develop a communication strategy around that point, because it's going to happen, and it is a really valid way for people to, for example, burn down the Market House in the South. I forget which state. It was one of the Carolinas. There's too much to keep up with going on right now. That has a history of slavery. I think it was a slave market. Yeah, fucking burn it down. Just get rid of it. It's this is the next phase of tearing down Confederate statues. Get rid of it. So, these are things that need to be done. And if they're going to block every other channel, it's going to happen like this. And we've been asking for take down the statues, and we've been asking for, can we have some rights? And they've said, no, 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 fuck you, we're going to kneel on your neck. So that's been the conversation so far. And we said, well, we'll elect a politician, Bernie. And they're like, no, 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 rig the primary, boom. Okay, well, now we're out in the streets. So I think that developing a line around property damage that is a widely held consensus, that would be really key. And I think that also the second point is we need to do more political education along the lines of the title of this video. Capitalism killed George Floyd. Racist cop Derek Chauvin was its weapon. Don't be a single issue rioter. What do I mean by that? Well, I think that too many people are looking at what's going on right now, and plenty aren't, by the way, but I think that there are still too many people looking at what's going on right now as being about charging Chauvin with first-degree murder, prosecuting him, sentencing him, etc. Maybe like, the other cops. But in other words, too many people are seeing this as oriented around that issue, or even like a cop-related issue in general. Other people are going further, saying abolish the police. Okay, you can't abolish the police without abolishing the system that created them. Capitalism needs these cops. Well, why does capitalism need these cops? And why is it so racist? Well, capitalism in the United States is deeply rooted in racism. You cannot uproot capitalism without uprooting racism in this country. And you can't uproot racism without uprooting capitalism. And we need to do that education that, people aren't single issue out there. Like this is because, and in watching videos from some of these cities, because I've tried to get as much of a sense of as possible as what are people saying on the ground and what's the conversation going on is, some people are like, we're out here to protest this one thing. And it's like, I get that. But it's also like, it is naive. And we have to, find ways to like communicate that to people that isn't alienating, but it is naive that, yes, I get it. That is the event that drew you out. And that's what you want justice for. But this same thing, Eric Garner, I said the exact same words as he was dying. I can't breathe. This is a systemic problem. Why is it a systemic problem? Because the racist police machinery is deeply entrenched. It goes back hundreds of years in the United States. There was a system of racialized slavery in this country, which was fundamental in building up capital in the United States. Eventually, yes, a civil war was fought to abolish, race-based chattel property slavery, where people were owned as property. Workers were owned as property because they were black. It was only legal like if you were of a certain race. That's deeply racist system. That's a deeply racist economy. Well, even when that system was overthrown and capitalism, regular wage slavery capitalism, took its place, there's still a very racialized hierarchy of who gets the good jobs and who gets the jobs that have low pay, low privilege, low rights, low prestige. Sorry, not privilege, but low prestige jobs. Who winds up working as the jobs that are traditionally devalued. And there's a racialized hierarchy to that. In fact, good example, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in Memphis during appearances related to what became known as the I Am a Man protests. What was this? It was a strike by sanitation workers who were all black that were going on strike for the right to unionize because it was illegal for public employees to unionize. And over the course of their strike, they're out there throwing garbage. That was their job. They weren't throwing garbage as part of the action, although, if they did, that's fine. But no, their jobs, they would ride on the trucks, throw the garbage, process the garbage of the town. And when they went out saying, hey, we want the right to form a union and we're going to go on strike to get it, even though going on strike is illegal, the dialogue that resulted between the working class of Memphis and the ruling class, white ruling class of Memphis, was like, these people don't know their place. What do these people and their place mean? These black people don't know that their place is at the bottom of the economic hierarchy. And although it's no longer a slave economy, we're still keeping this economy running based off of their labor at the lowest levels. And so what started out as a strike and a protest over union rights quickly turned into a strike and a protest just for basic recognition of humanity. Okay? So if we want to struggle against capitalism in the United States, we need to understand many working people who are people of color, they're not even recognized as people. Okay? So we really, really, really need, if, you know, and anybody who's been involved in the struggle in the United States can tell you this, is that there's a deep, deep connection between racism and capitalism in the United States. Now, as socialists, we would still say that the dominant contradiction, the dominant determining status in the United States or any country is class. It just has a greater impact than anything else. But race is also hugely important, and it is intertwined with that system and helps support the class system. So very, very key. If you're trying to do socialist, anti-capitalist work in the United States, you need to have training in anti-racism. You need to be well-versed in the racist history of the United States because it is deeply intertwined with the capitalism that you're trying to uproot. So here comes what is arguably the more difficult part, and which is going the other way. There are a lot of anti-racist activists who aren't necessarily socialist or communist. And I have seen this, many are. I mean, many anti-racist activists have also noted, just approaching it from the other angle, seen that, as they try to uproot racism, they realize that capitalism perpetuates because it exists off of racism. And so they realize that, they may have come to it from the anti-racism angle, just as, some of us have come to it from the anti-capitalist angle, and then seen that anti-racism work is intrinsic and integral, it's just inseparable from it. Have seen that anti-capitalism is vital to really do the anti-racism work. There are also anti-racist activists who are not familiar with anti-capitalist theory. They're not familiar with some of the facts and, how these systems are interrelated. So they may genuinely see people who are socialist or communist as, quote, playing anarchy by becoming involved in these demonstrations on anything other than a strictly, police justice basis. And that's a conversation we need to have, is that, liberal anti-racism is not going to cut it. That is to say, anti-racism that tries to uphold capitalism is not anti-racism that is A, effective, or, B, is going to get us anywhere. So I think that that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, because there is not enough of unity between anti-racist and anti-capitalist activists at this point. The ruling class knows this. I think that it's something that we could easily fix because there already is a lot of unity. It's just a process that we need to further and develop. But so what is the ruling class saying, and what have they been saying all weekend about these protests and uprisings? Well, Donald Trump blaming it on white anarchists, Antifa, etc. The media is doing the same. Governor Tim Walz, populist Democrat. At this point, when you hear populist, just think racist, because it wasn't always racist back in the 1800s, but populism since then has had a long, long history of racism. Basically, anyone embracing populism over socialism, usually for race reasons. So anyway, that's outside the scope of this video. Populism, look it up. Okay, so what's the line? Is that outside agitators, white agitators, are responsible for the, quote, looting, while people of color want peaceful protests. So basically the narrative from both the Democrats and the Republicans and the media that the 1% owns, just as they own the Democrats and the Republicans. So all the mouthpieces of the 1% are putting out this basically unified line. People of color just want peaceful protest, and it's white hooligan radicals who want, quote, looting, rioting, quote, violence, by which they mean not interpersonal violence, but property destruction. Is this true? No, it's not true. First of all, it's just factually not true. Just there's reports from all over the country that, actually, I think I saw one from Philly where it was like during the day, the peaceful protest part of the day was visibly mixed race, maybe even majority white. And then at night, it was not majority white. And that was when things got, it's the nighttime. Things got a little wilder. So, first of all, it's not true, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with the kinds of expressions that people have been having against corporate property and things like that. This is a fucked system, and get rid of it. Just like we've been trying to get rid of the Confederate statues. Get rid of it. Get rid of these symbols of oppressive power, oppressive racist power over the working class. It keeps us all miserable and divided, and it's horrible, and it would be a much, much better world without these things. And if they won't get rid of them peacefully, I think we're seeing what change actually requires in the United States, as I said. But so the 1% is putting out this line that, these radicals who are trying to get people to see beyond just this police, issue, which, don't worry, we'll take care of it. We've already arrested that cop, never happen again. Believe us. They're trying to do multiple things at the same time. They're trying to pacify less radical people of color. They're trying to demonize Antifa. They're trying to delegitimize people of color who are radical. It's like all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, MSNBC's blaming it on Russia. I'll bet Russia loves this right now. But as other people have pointed out, it's like, well, there's protests going on in every city, like across the United States. So where are these outside agitators coming from? Canada? It doesn't make sense. No, the outside agitators are the National Guard, the state police, and people like that. Those are the ones who don't live in those communities. That's actually why state police were invented, was back in the day. There were big miners' strikes in Pennsylvania, and the local cops would not arrest them, and they would not crack heads because they had family who worked in the mines. Well, they invented the Pennsylvania State Troopers, the state police, as union-busting, anti-labor cops. That's what they're there for. And that's what they're still here for now. That's what the National Guard is about. And that's what the 1% is trying to do, is they're trying to simultaneously delegitimize the anger that's going into the protests, not just against police violence, but against this entire system for all who can recognize it. And they're trying to split black and white from uniting, white and, just people of color in general, from uniting, which needs to happen. If we're ever going to uproot capitalism, like I said, it needs to have the cross-racial boundaries for anti-racist work to uproot the system that thrives off of racism and racial division and racial tension and animosity. So, Trump has declared Antifa, which of course means anti-fascist, comes from a German word originally because they were fighting the Nazis, but it's Antifa, anti-fascist is what it means. He's trying to have Antifa declared a terrorist group. If you think that this won't apply to you, if you think that you're going to go out there and just, I'm peacefully protesting. No, they're going to call you fucking terrorist anyway. Guess why the system feels threatened by anti-fascist protesting, by anti-fascist organizing and activism? Guess. I'll cue the Jeopardy music, dude. Oh, very good. Yes, because it's a fascist country, and they will label anyone who is organizing against it anti-fascist terrorists. Even if you are peaceful, they don't care because their system is violence. They're violent. They're psychopaths. We're looking at a national uprising against police brutality and murder. I mean, that was the thing that set it off, right? The core issue that this fire is spreading from is police murder and police violence. And then, many people, you don't have to be a genius to realize what I said earlier, that racism is deepened by capitalism, which thrives off of it. We would have a much less racist country if this wasn't a capitalist country. If you didn't have the capitalists constantly stoking racial animosity. And so you have a country that just got set on fire because directly of police brutality. How do they respond? They're doubling down on it. They're shooting people in the eye with rubber bullets and tracers. They're blinding people. They are brutalizing people. I mean, there's videos all over the place of, there's one, I forget what state it is. I want to say Pennsylvania, maybe, where there's like a guy getting interviewed in the foreground and like a tank rolls down with cops behind it. And they just like assault this like 70-year-old dude with a walker on the sidewalk for like standing there. In Minneapolis, the National Guard is driving around neighborhoods and shooting rubber bullets at people standing on their porches. This is their response to nationwide uprisings about police violence. Yeah. So I think that while the Hong Kong protests are right-wing, they are sponsored by the CIA, and that's a whole other story. We can learn a lot about sustained protest and turn it to better purposes, turn it to anti-capitalist purposes from them. By that, I just mean tactics like how to neutralize a tear gas canister, things like that. So go look that kind of stuff up, how to block facial recognition, because we're going to need this stuff, okay? Do not photograph people's faces, by the way. Photograph the cops, video the cops. If you want to get pictures of like, property damage, fine. Do not get protesters' faces, because they will be tracking those people down 2 or 3 months from now. That has happened in the past. Okay. The system is feeling threatened. We may not be at the point now, like I said, to turn these uprisings into a revolution and completely remove them from power. But I think we have the power in the organization now, and the circumstance, this whole pandemic and the widespread unemployment and stuff, we do, and as well as the technology to share, communicate information. That's why this spreads so fast. We do have the potential right now to turn these into very sustained and lasting and productive uprisings. But it's really going to be, in my opinion, the things I was just talking about, is talking to anti-racists about anti-capitalism and how our causes are totally intertwined, and coming up with a line about property damage so that that is no longer a divisive point, explaining to people that is not violence and the cops are the ones who bring the violence. That's always been the case. There's a really good movie about protest documentary. If you want to check it out, it's probably on YouTube. I'll see if I can post it on the Socialism for All page. It's called The Miami Model. It's about, how police operate during protests to try to disrupt and discredit. But we may be coming to a point in U.S. history where the concept of discrediting a protest no longer really gets traction, because even just all the kind of moderate people who felt severely screwed by Bernie, I'll bet you anything that they got exposed to enough, many of them anyway, got exposed to enough far left people and far left ideas during that Bernie coalition. The process of doing that work and thinking about what kind of other world actually is possible to, look at these things. And even if 5 or 10 years ago, they might've said, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. They, of course, it's like these people, you people shouldn't be doing that. What do phrases like that mean? People who I look down on and scorn. I think, probably a lot of these people by now are have realized the system will not accommodate the slightest amount of justice or change. You can cry for the most just thing in the world. 99% of people can recognize it as just and needed, and what's going on as violent and unjust and evil even. Even in the George W. Bush years, the amount of people who called what they were doing evil was really quite pronounced. Unfortunately, they got conned into thinking Obama was going to be the savior, and then of course he wasn't. I think that this concept of delegitimizing a protest may carry less water. Well, again, we as agitators, and that is agitate. What does agitating mean? It means taking an existing grievance and helping people articulate it and draw it out. So we can say to workers, hey, do you like working 70 hours a week for shit pay and still being in debt? The answer is obviously no. Well, we agitate by explaining the class system and helping them to articulate their demands in a constructive way. So this is what we need, my opinion, in the United States now, is we need leadership in every state that can help guide these protests towards the most constructive, sustained, lasting changes possible. So we're now starting to engage in a mass basis in U.S. society in actions that can result in change. People have realized now more than ever, burn your vest. Well, the vest went into action a few days ago. Rest in peace, George Floyd. It makes me honestly really sad, like that happened. I have no words. It's the guy was yelling for his. If you watch the video, he was like yelling for his mama. I mean, it was really sad. He knew he was going to die, and that's so many people across this country are, whether you're getting murdered, snuffed out in the street under a cop's knee or boot, or whether you are worked to death, no matter what it is, there's so many ways the system can kill you. Racist cops are just a very visible tip of the iceberg. There's so many ways that the system can kill you. And that's why I say, let's not let these deaths be in vain. Derek Chauvin, bad racist cop working for a racist system, probably a sadist, probably enjoyed it. But he was a weapon, not the problem. He was the tip of the iceberg of the system. Like, he was a snowflake on the tip of the iceberg. This goes so much deeper, and we as socialists and communists have to get out there and, in a positive, constructive way, help this process go along, and talk to liberal anti-racists and help turn them into radical anti-racists. And if you need to brush up on your anti-racism, it will make you a better anti-capitalist if you do so. So please do that. I'm right now reading a book called The Rise of Massive Resistance, which is, I think, from 1969. And it is all about the anti-desegregation efforts, basically the way that, slavery was over, Jim Crow was over, segregation was over, but white culture was still, white society in the South was still digging in every way possible to be racist. Like I said about the Memphis I Am a Man protest, to just continue to deny people of color their humanity. So we do have a system where white workers may be more used to, fighting in a more traditional framework for like union rights and pay and stuff like that. People of color, working people, are fighting for those things too. But in addition, they're also fighting for a recognition of their humanity. So, that's white privilege. Not to get like caught up in like liberal class denying things of like just checking your privilege is going to make everything okay. But realize, whatever you have gone through, maybe as a white socialist communist, union organizer, you didn't have to fight as hard, at least, for a basic recognition of your humanity in a way that people of color in the United States do, because that is the system. Myself personally, I've had a varied background. I mean, I'm white, no doubt about that. That's not what I'm saying. My heritage is like Northern to Central European, but varied by, I have lived in very urban, very diverse places with less money. For a while, my family had money and I was in like more conservative circles. It was absolutely horrible. And then I went back to being poor and living in like rural poverty. And so I've seen a mix, and yeah, it can be really hard. I can only imagine what it would be like having to fight all of this, having to fight poverty and having to fight racism as well, because just fighting poverty has been ridiculous. So right now, in this moment where we are all fighting to get rid of capitalism, I'm just trying to say what I can in solidarity with comrades of color, because I don't know how you do it. But solidarity, and let's keep things going. And yeah, I'll be uploading some more audiobooks soon. Hopefully some things that are relevant to the struggle. Thanks.